Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. During the Clone Wars, the Jedi and the clone troopers steal the limelight, and rightly so. Their daring escapades against the overwhelming numbers of the Separatist Droid army are truly inspiring. It's a great story of quality overcoming quantity. But the Separatists also had some truly cunning and terrifying military leaders on their side. Today we're going to take a look at some of the Separatist leaders that the clones feared the most. The Confederacy of Independent Systems was rich in raw materials, industrial manufacturing, and financial assets. What it lacked was a large population and military culture. And so whatever the Separatist High Council couldn't manufacture on their own, they just brought with their massive credit reserves. Not only did they manage to buy entire armies, they also bought some of the most skilled fighters to lead those armies. In the first year of the war, shortly after the Battle of Geonosis, the homeworld of the Munilist was attacked by an army led by General Obi-Wan Kenobi. The IGBC essentially backed the galactic credit, the reserve currency of the galaxy, so they could basically hire anyone they wanted to, including the legendary Jedi bounty hunter Dirge. I say legendary because the Jedi were like these mythical creatures that very few people had heard of, but when you do see one in person, it is an awe-inspiring sight. Their bodies were actually shapeless masses of tentacles. Dirge would wear a suit of armor to give some shape to that mass, so that he kind of looks like a bipedal humanoid, but his true form is more like a giant spaghetti monster kind of thing. The Jedi were able to live thousands of years, which makes them even more long-lived than Yoda's species. And throughout this time, they could gather an immense amount of resources and quite a lot of knowledge and experience. This means when you face a Jedi warrior, they will be extremely cunning and well equipped, and Dirge was no different. While most Jedi throughout the years learned that peace is the way, Dirge kind of went the other way. He also became cybernetically modified, and he also trained beneath a Mandalorian. Just look at his armor and all the weapons attached to it. Dirge is basically the most overpowered character in all of Star Wars. In Legends, during the Battle of Munilist, Dirge would lead a group of IG Lancers on speeder bikes on a lightning strike against the Republic invasion force. They were able to quickly cut through Republic lines and wreak havoc in the rear of their formation amongst the self-propelled heavy artillery platforms that were bombarding the city. Only a countercharge by Obi-Wan Kenobi and his clones on Lancer bikes managed to stop a complete rout of Republic forces. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Dirge would engage in hand-to-hand combat. Kenobi proved to be the more skilled combatant and manages to plunge his lightsaber into Dirge's abdomen. The bounty hunter laughs off the attack and quickly retaliates with all the weapons mounted onto his armor in a very Mandalorian fashion. Obi-Wan Kenobi would survive the onslaught and then pour all of his energy into a flurry of lightsaber strikes that finally manages to cut Dirge in half. Of course, this was still not a fatal wound to Dirge. You see, so few people knew exactly what the Jedi's physical capabilities were that a lot of people would just end up underestimating them. Earlier in the Clone Wars, Dirge managed to catch several Jedi off guard during the Battle of Umadun, when their lightsabers also failed to kill him. Later on, during the Battle of Munilist, Obi-Wan Kenobi would confront Dirge again. This time, the bounty hunter would actually consume the Jedi and pull him into his tentacle mass. But Obi-Wan Kenobi would then use the Force to rip Dirge apart. But even that doesn't permanently kill him. Anakin would be the one to finally kill Dirge, who basically put him in an escape pod and launched him towards a star. Well, at least that's what happened in Legends. In the Disney canon, Dirge actually survives the Clone Wars and continues to fight all throughout the Imperial era. There are very few things that can make a clone veteran shudder in fear, but mention the backwater planet Jabiim, and that's exactly what happens. Jabiim was one of the most challenging campaigns that the Republic forces would take on during the Clone Wars, and the struggle here really reflects the larger political and cultural struggle that was at the core of the Outer Rim secessionist movement. Jabiim was a relatively unremarkable world at first glance. Its surface was covered in mud, thanks to a continuous lightning and thunderstorm that made atmospheric travel difficult and interfered with sensors. There was also a continuous torrential downpour made out of acid rain, making this world literally any infantry soldier's worst nightmare. The planet did have an ore-rich core, which was really valuable, but for some reason, the Republic would neglect its security responsibilities for the planet Jabiim and allow it to fall prey to disease, bandits, and other ills. And so it's not surprising that when the secessionist movement started, the people of Jabiim would choose to ally themselves with the Separatist Alliance. A charismatic Jabeam native named Alto Stratus would take control of the planet and launch a brutal war against the Republic loyalists on his planet. The Republic would launch an intervention on Jabeam, and many say that the Republic did this so that they could keep all of the ore beneath the planet's surface out of Separatist hands. When the clones invaded with their Jedi commanders, Alto Stratus had the will of the people behind him, and he also had established a cult of personality, making his movement that much stronger. His personal bodyguards, the Nimbus Commandos, were equipped with repulsor boots and were also quite formidable. This made Alto Stratus seem a little bigger than life and unstoppable. And more importantly, Alto Stratus was a brilliant tactician. He used every advantage he could to defeat his enemy. The Jedi were simply not prepared for this meat grinder of a conflict, and the heavy downpour of Jabeam heroes and their ideology were the first to go. The Republic would lose thousands of clones during this early campaign in the Clone Wars, and Alto Stratus personally would eliminate several Jedi on the battlefield. Finally, after more than a month of continuous fighting, only 9 Jedi Padawan remained out of the initial strike force. They would fortify their position at Cobalt Station against an overwhelming force of more than 10,000 Jabeam nationalists and Separatist droids. Anakin Skywalker was amongst them, but ordered directly by Chancellor Palpatine to evacuate. The Jedi Padawan and remaining clones at Cobalt Station would fight to the death for 4 straight days. Ultimately, the garrison would be overwhelmed, but Jedi healer Aubrey Wynn, with her last breath, would deliver the killing blow to Alto Stratus. She, along with all the remaining Jedi and Republic personnel at the station, would perish. Anakin Skywalker would finally make it to the evacuation point by day 43 of the battle. With only enough transports to lift his clones out of the battle, Anakin would be forced to abandon the Jabeam loyalists who had fought by his side. Alto Stratus might have perished, but the damage he does to the image of the Jedi and the Republic will be very long-lasting. Darts Dinar was a Zygerian slaver who led Separatist forces on various missions to gather slaves for the CIS war effort. He would be in charge of the mission on Kuros, where he would successfully subjugate the local Togruta colony and prepare them to be shipped off as slaves. But the governor of the colony managed to send out a distress signal to the Republic before his capture. Dinar's forces were no match for the elite assault brigades sent to rescue the Togrutas. It was led by Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the Separatist commander was smart enough to build in a contingency should his forces be overrun in a situation just like this. Prior to the arrival of the Republic, Dinar's forces planted bombs all around the Togruta village, holding the residents as hostage. Obi-Wan Kenobi would attempt to negotiate with the Zygerian slaver and ends up fighting him in hand-to-hand combat. Surprisingly, Darts Dinar was able to hold his own against the very powerful Jedi, and even manages to land a few strikes. For a non-Force user to do this in hand-to-hand combat with a Jedi is truly remarkable. Darts Dinar would eventually get captured by the Jedi, but before that happens, he almost kills Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker with his pet Blixus, like some deranged Pokemon trainer. I love it. To get onto this list, you basically have to kill a Jedi, or at least cause a bunch of Jedi a huge headache. Gez Hokum is a legendary Mandalorian mercenary from the beloved Republic Commando series. He was placed in charge of the separatist world known as Kulura. It was here that his army of bandits and other street thugs would protect a top-secret research facility. This facility was dedicated to creating a nanovirus known as FG-36. It specifically targeted the Fett DNA. See, there was something in the Fett genome that no other human being had, and that was the genetic marker for accelerated aging. This would be the specific genetic trait that the FG-36 virus would target. This project could have endangered the entire Republic war effort, and for Gez Hokum to be assigned to this duty means that he was quite capable. The mercenary captain would kill the first Jedi Master sent to infiltrate his operation, leaving his young Padawan alone on the world. Word has it that the Mandalorian bounty hunter used the Jedi's own lightsaber to kill him. Ultimately, the Mandalorian mercenary was no match for a clone commando unit known as Omega Squad. The clone commandos were one of the few clone units that could actually keep up with the Jedi and carry out tasks similar to a Jedi strike force. Rift Hampson is basically a talking shark. While not as cunning and evil as a dolphin, his aquatic nature and aggressive instincts made him an apex predator in the underwater battlefields of the Clone Wars. Rift Hampson would first serve as an advisor to Quarren chieftain Nozar Ri. He had been sent to the planet of Mon Cala to disturb the fragile peace between the Quarrens and the Mon Cala people. He would successfully convince Nozar Ri to aggressively seize the throne from the Mon Cala with separatist backing. Rift Hampson is basically the last person you want to see in an underwater battle. In a In a skirmish between fish people and squid heads, Rift Hampson was very sharp in his abilities and possessed a powerful bite and impressive swimming speed. Thanks to Rift Hampson's leadership, the Korans, with their Separatist allies, managed to defeat a combined army of clones, Mon Calamari, and Gungans. Rift Hampson also brought some truly innovative weapons to the fight for the Korans. This includes the High Droid Medusa Jellyfish Cyborg. These weapons were practically invulnerable to all conventional weapons and were able to quickly take out entire armies with their tentacles. Rift Hampson's forces also managed to capture Kit Fisto, one of the most skilled aquatic generals in the Jedi Order. They'd also capture Anakin Skywalker. But ultimately, it was Rift Hampson's love for explosive knives that would be his downfall. While going toe-to-toe with the Mon Calamari monarch Princely Char, Hampson would succumb to his own exploding knife. Which is a good reminder to everyone that every weapon you bring to the battlefield is something that could potentially be used against you. Continuing with the Separatist trend of employing animal-themed mercenary captains, next up we have the Arch Admiral known as Trench. Mere mention of this devious naval commander sends shivers down the spines of his enemies. He survived many battles that no one else could have survived. He's come back from the dead on numerous occasions. Admiral Trench's career dates back well before the beginning of the Clone Wars. For instance, Admiral Wolf Yularen first faced Trench during the Battle of Malastare Narrows in 34 BBY. During that conflict, Trench maintained a blockade over Malastare and fought off numerous Republic incursions. It wasn't until a Jedi-led task force finally arrived that Trench's forces were defeated. He reportedly was killed in that battle. But more than a decade later, Trench would reappear over the planet of Christophsis, once again forming an impenetrable blockade that deterred all Republic attacks against it. This time, Jedi General Anakin Skywalker's fleet would be forced to retreat and reassess the situation after losing several ships. Skywalker would ultimately use a stealth ship to bypass the blockade and manage to destroy Trench's command ship, but once again, the Arch Commander would survive the battle, although this time he does suffer some damage and gets some cybernetic enhancements. In the last year of the war, Admiral Trench would reappear once again, leading Separatist forces in a successful defense of the space station around Ringo Vinda. And after that, Trench would be spotted during the Battle of Anaxis, leading a Separatist charge right into the core of Republic territory. Trench would finally be defeated at Anaxis, this time for certain. Anakin Skywalker would plunge a lightsaber into his heart, ending the Spider-Man's reign of terror. Asajj Ventress, aka the Hairless Harpy, is perhaps one of the most underrated military commanders that fight for the Separatist cause. Many of the individuals on this list, from Admiral Trench to Durr to Alto Stratus, owe their success to the fact that Asajj Ventress was on the same battlefield as they were and creating massive amounts of chaos and drawing forces away from them. As a Sith assassin, apprenticed to Count Dooku and Dathmiri Nightsister, Asajj Ventress was an extremely deadly combatant. She was able to hold her own against Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker at the same time, something that very few fighters could. She was also very charming and deceitful, and on numerous occasions she was able to corrupt the incorruptible. When Separatist war criminal and Trade Federation Viceroy Newt Gunray was being transported to Coruscant, where he would stand trial in front of the Senate, Asajj Ventress managed to bribe the commander of the Republic Senate Commando Unit in charge of guarding him. And then during the Battle of Christophsis, Asajj Ventress managed to turn a clone trooper named Sergeant Slick against his brothers. Not only was Sergeant Slick feeding the Separatists information about Republic troop movements, he also sabotaged their motor pool. This remains the only case that I know of a clone trooper betraying his comrades for credits. Asajj Ventress might not be as well known as a battlefield commander, but her covert operations oftentimes did much more damage than an entire Separatist droid army could. Asajj Ventress would prove to be critical to the Separatist Alliance early on in the war. She would take part in the Battle of Kamino, Christophsis, Teth, along with the Battle of Korm and many others. Unfortunately for Asajj Ventress, she oftentimes faced both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin together, and this really prevented her from, achieving all of her objectives on numerous occasions. Darth Sidious would also become suspicious of Count Dooku's apprentice and her growing power. Eventually, Darth Sidious made Count Dooku disown her. During the Battle of Solus, Asajj Ventress would be abandoned by Dooku and forced to go into hiding. By following his master's orders, Dooku took away one of the deadliest commanders available to the Separatist Alliance. When Count Dooku, the leader of the Confederacy of Independent Systems and heart and soul of the Separatist movement, lost his head, the Confederacy of Independent Systems did not collapse overnight. Sure, the Separatist High Council was intact, but most of these individuals were business leaders and not actually wartime leaders or political leaders. They were essentially just a board of directors and nothing more than that. The only reason why the Separatists were able to continue fighting was because of General Grievous. His backstory is one of great hardship and betrayal and loss. A long time ago, General Grievous was 100% organic. He was a young Kalish warrior who was fighting for the rights of his people who were being oppressed by the insectoid race known as the Yamri. They were technologically more advanced, and so they were able to subjugate most of the Kalish population. Grievous was a brilliant tactician, though. He led his people to victory after victory, and eventually he even took the fight to the Yamri's homeworld of Hook. Unfortunately, the Yamri had high standings within the Republic Senate, and the Kalish were an unknown entity. And so the Yamri appealed to the Republic for help, and the Republic would sanction the Kalish people and put a trade embargo on them. This would lead to the starvation of hundreds of thousands of Kalish. Grievous would eventually be wounded in a horrific shuttle crash during the conflict, which he believed was caused by the Jedi, but in fact had been orchestrated by the very people who would employ him, the Sith. General Grievous in many ways is Darth Vader 1.0. He is consumed and driven by hatred and anger. He has lost everyone he cared for in his life. He never really understood who exactly his real enemies were, and ends up working for the very people who destroyed his life. And now all he does is focus on turning his body into a weapon, and that's because he believes he can ease his pain through the destruction of anyone who stands in his way. General Grievous would learn all the lightsaber forms and would become one of the most notorious Jedi killers in galactic history, and one of the only ones who was neither a Sith nor a Mandalorian. Grievous would kill dozens of Jedi throughout the war and wear their lightsabers as trophies. He also brutally crushed the Dathomiri Night Sisters and put an end to their 1,000-year-old civilization. The version of Grievous we see in Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith, was a mere shadow of what he once was in his peak form. At the end of the Clone Wars, his body's remaining organs were already deteriorating and failing. There was a time when simply mentioning the name Grievous would make your average Jedi shudder and make dookie in their pants. Like metaphorically through the Force, not actually. It was only after the death of Grievous that the Confederacy would finally collapse. So there you have it, guys. Those are some of the most ferocious Separatist commanders out there. Let me know in the comment section below if I've missed any of your favorites. And as usual, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.